Russian President Vladimir Putin has won a third consecutive election victory with almost 88% of the vote, says the head of the country's election authority. This will be his fifth term in office, although Western countries, including the US, have condemned his victory, calling it unfair and undemocratic. The Kremlin dismissed the criticism, saying it was clear the results shows the people of Russia were consolidating around him. The three-day vote saw a record turnout of more than 75%, surpassing the previous high of 1991 presidential election. Putin's closest competitor, supported by Russia's Communist Party, received only 4.3% of the votes. And even as voting was in progress, Russia launched a deadly missile attack in the city of Mykolaiv in Ukraine, while Moscow accused Kiev of sabotaging its elections with strikes on its infrastructure. And in his post-election speech, Putin said Western troops in Ukraine could lead to World War III. While several leaders, including Recep Tayyip Erdogan, congratulated Putin for his victory, the Turkish president also added that Ankara is ready to resume any facilitator role in returning to the negotiation table in Ukraine. And for more on the outcome of the Russian election and Turkish-Russian relations for the past 2 decades, joining me now from Ankara is Ivan Starodubtsev. He is a political analyst. And from Oslo, University of Southeastern Norway, Professor Glenn Deason. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Glenn, President Putin has claimed an overwhelming victory, surprising no one. So, what's next?
Well, no, I guess it shouldn't surprise anyone. His approval rating was about in the low 80s. But again, even the people who do not necessarily approve of his performance, I guess they nonetheless would recognize it's not a good time to rock the leadership when you're in the middle of a war. But also, of course, Putin continues to have very high credibility and approval given the achievements of the past 24 years. If we look at Russia in the 90s compared to now, it's not comparable. So, so I think this is he enters a new period, presidential term, strengthened, I would say, as he now can show very strong support behind him. So it's unclear where it's going to go from here. But of course, the risk of having a president for so long in power is that a lot of the stability rests on one man. And this, of course, can end up being no stability at all. So the legacy of Putin would probably be assessed by the stability after he also steps down. But this is a challenge for another day.
So, Ivan, I mean, what are your key takeaways from this year's election, which saw a record turnout, more than, if I'm not mistaken, 75%? I mean, why was the turnout so high, you think?
Actually, it is like Glenn said, this is not a time for sure for Russians to ignore the elections. So they consider this election as a part of the war. It is these elections is a message to outside of the Russian Federation that it is not possible to shake Russia from the inside. So there is no room for that. This is a referendum to support Putin and Putin policy outside. And there is another dimension of this result. Of course, Putin worked hardly in these elections. We never saw such often public appearances from him in all his political life. And I think he tried to bring a message to Russian people that these elections are very much important, and he expected their presence at this election, and he expected a Russian voice in these elections.
So, Glenn, there was some criticism from the West, but we'll touch on it later. Among the leaders who have congratulated Putin over his victory was Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He also expressed his readiness to play a mediating role in the Ukraine conflict. What do you think? Is still there a room for that?
Yes, well, Turkey already attempted to play a role as a negotiator in early 2022, which was sabotaged then by the United States and the British. So it's speaking against it would obviously that Turkey is not necessarily a neutral state as it's part of NATO. On the other hand, we see very much time and time again that Turkey is able to run very much an independent foreign policy. And if we look at the relations between Russia and Turkey over the past 20 years, we've seen this dynamic that they have so many competing interests but still they're able to deepen their relations and cooperate. And I think this is also something says a lot about Turkey's diplomatic maturity as well, because they tend to find themselves on different sides on almost all issues,
Yes.
Which is why it's very confusing to many people in the West that they're able to get along and deepen cooperation so well. But again, this is the purpose of diplomacy. This is to harmonize interests when possible and to manage competition when these interests can't be harmonized. And so I think the political maturity of Turkey suggests it could be an excellent negotiator when hopefully we get an end to this war.
So it's obvious that their relations surprise a lot of people. Ivan, we know Putin is expected to visit Turkey in April, maybe in early May. So what factors will be dominating their agenda in the next term? I mean, will they be able to maintain what they call a strategic relationship, as Glenn briefly mentioned, amid these regional conflicts?
Actually, what we do expect from this visit of Putin is quite solid agreements on the number of the subjects which were pending up to now. Specifically, if I list them, it is a natural gas hub, it is a second nuclear power plant, and of course, payments between the countries. So basically, I do expect that this visit will be mostly focused on bilateral issues, because at the end of the day, those strategic points and items which I just listed, they do affect directly our regional cooperation in many regions outside, like Syria, like Libya, like Caucasus. So we have to resolve those issues between of us. They are pending. They are now already I would say, have a kind of urgency.
So, Glenn, several Western countries, as we briefly mentioned, including the United States, have called the election unfair and undemocratic. But now they will have to deal with Putin, at least for another 6 years. So how do you this will play out? I mean, are tensions set to further escalate? And where does this leave Turkey?
Well, obviously, one can always criticize an election. I would say that Russia's democracy still has many flaws. For one, it's often dependent on strong leaders and the cliques. I would like to see more of a transition to strong institutions. But of course, it has to be noted that the Western countries are not merely objective observers here, as we are fighting effectively a proxy war against Russia. And in this information war, is a key component. So delegitimizing the Russian state is obviously a key component of this. So I can't really see any scenario in which the Western countries would have actually called the Russian election free and fair, irrespective of what happened on the ground. But in terms of how this will, what will follow next is, of course, it's going to be very difficult to have any real diplomacy, because even during the Cold War, one didn't demonize the adversary to this extent, not even by a long shot. So this is the problem. One demonizes the opponent, and then it's not possible to have proper diplomacy anymore. So I think it's diplomatic immaturity to demonize another leader in this way. And this is why we tend to see in the West that every time we have a conflict with the Russians, this is when we end all diplomacy with Russia, even though this is when we need diplomacy the most. So I think this is a shame.
So, Ivan, how have sharp diplomatic discussions, or let's say disagreements among France, Germany, and Poland on helping Ukraine, or not helping it, been encouraging the Russian leadership? And are we likely to see more aggressive Russia in Ukraine moving forward? I mean, is Ukraine going to be, or continue to be, Putin's priority?
Actually, there is such a view in Russia at Europe, that there is no single voice in Europe, and of course we follow these developments between France, Germany, and Poland very, very tightly. About Ukraine and about position and policy of Russia in Ukraine, I would not call it aggressive. I would think that many people expect from Russia, from Russian leadership, to be more proportional in Ukraine. There are many claims that Putin is not enough Putin. So I mean, he is not giving proportional answers to the actions from the European side. So I do believe that Russia will be more proportional. Which expect some changes in our government, and we expected new phases of the new elite. That will be very much a dramatic shift because the face of the Russian elite will be changed. Maybe you remember Putin in his last interview said that only heroes and participants of special Russian military operation will be the part of next Russian government. Yes. So I do expect that it will be more proportional.
So, Glenn, very quickly, Putin has also said Russia doesn't interfere in U.S. elections and he is ready to work with any leader chosen by the American people. So the question is, what's next for U.S.-Russia relations in the run-up to the elections in the United States?
Well, I think it's a key priority for Russia not to be seen as taking any position, because once it leans in, this will be interpreted as interference. Mm-hmm. And I think, as the election in 2016 demonstrated, trying to use Russia as a way to delegitimize Trump was, of course, a key strategy. This has also been revealed later on, that the intelligence agencies actually knew that the Russians at that time even preferred Clinton because she was more stable than Trump. But of course, Russia can be used as a tool in the internal diplomatic affairs of the United States, in political process. You saw this also in 2020 with Biden, when he was caught with this laptop scandal. Immediately, the intelligence agencies and media tried to blame it on Russia until the election was over. So I think Russia wants to avoid being part of the the American election altogether.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.